Hello everyone! I'm back a lot more quickly than the last interval between videos because I just a couple days ago finished up round 1 of the Class A Championships, and that's a very important place to be because that tells me which factions may have made A tier overall. I don't yet know who gets a minus, who gets a plus, and who just gets an A, but I can now say these are the factions that are making A tier. It's also a good time to catch up with overall what happened in the first round of the championship, where the seeded decks from that were old good decks got exposed to the newer decks that came out of the qualifier series, and what I think is going to happen in round 2. So let's dive straight into, first off, how am I setting up A tier? Well, I had 2 possible requirements for A-. One of them was, in order to make A-, a faction needs at least 2 decks that win a game in the championship. That is, go at least 1 and 3 rather than 0 and 4. 25 decks, 25 factions that are not in S tier managed to do this. That's a lot of factions, and that means, we've got a reasonably, if you were going to play a big deck tournament in the metagame that is my A tier and below, there'd be a wide range of viable decks. The second option were 2 decks have to actually make it through to the second round, and that, I believe, is what I'm actually going to go with for A-. There are 19 factions that managed to do this, and the critical thing is, what do we think of the 6 factions that got 1 win with 2 decks, but not a 2-2 record with 2 decks? Little aside here, since an odd number of decks, 31 decks, made it to round 2 on their own, Shield Kree gets a lifeline. This is not relevant for tiering, because Shield and Kree, this is the only deck they're present in A tier. It's very synergistic, and without being together, those 2 factions are not A tier on their own. In future, however, what I'm going to do, like if round 3 is required for getting an A rating rather than A-, if a deck makes it to 3A on a lifeline, in order to count as having really made 3A, they're going to have to at least make a draw in round 3A, so that they get... So that they prove that they belonged there at least a little bit. If a deck gets a lifeline to 3A but then loses, I'm going to treat it as if it was eliminated in 2B. So likewise, Shield Kree needs to win at least 1 game against Exploring Avengers in order to count as having made 2A. Otherwise, they're considered to have been eliminated in 1B. That's just, if it comes up, that's how I'm going to handle it. So these are the 6 factions, and at least 3 of these factions, in my opinion, fairies, kitties, princesses, were all definitely A tier 3 years ago, if not more recently than that. Fairies was possibly A plus 3 years ago, like after the release of Titan Pack, but before, say, the release of Marvel or so. I would have put fairies as an A plus easily. They had an 1800-something rating in my faction ratings. They were one of the top factions by rating. I believe they were higher rated at the time than any faction in A tier has a current rating on my live rating list. Even though my live rating list, I actually haven't added these games in round 1 of the championship to it, and I need to do that. Kitties, back in 2016, I think they were pretty solidly the 4th best faction in the game for 1v1 after Aliens, Robots, Geeks being, the top 3, Geeks at the top, Robots third. But both, the game is sped up, which is not good for kitties because kitties don't play fast. Kitties get wins by stealing solos from base wins, rather than by pushing the tempo. And the up-tempo pace of the game now really makes it hard for kitties decks to keep up when stuff goes badly for them. But also, the current metagame has a lot more minions where either you can give them flexible power levels, so keep sticking them on even power levels to make all the odd power level effects of kitties cards inefficient. I actually, in one standard metagame in Magic the Gathering when I was a teenager, I actually played a tournament deck that was partially based on the fact that in that particular year, most of the removal in the standard format hit 2 or 4 power minions, and I sort of built a deck around having everything have odd amounts of toughness. So I'm familiar with that kind of strategy of make the opponent's removal inefficient by just being 1 power too big for it. And in this case, kitties in this format just feel like they're running into a lot of 2, 4, 6 power stuff. When the opponent chooses to make it even numbers of powers, that makes kitties just less efficient. Princesses, before the release of Marvel, princesses were, in my opinion, definitely A tier. Now they suffer a bit from the fact that Avengers in this format are almost always the better choice. And it's hard for a princess's deck to excel when it's got to deal with the Avengers deck with the same partner, and on top of that, the opposing decks that are making it into the field are decks that are at least capable of dealing with most Avengers decks, and that means that they also tend to be decent at dealing with princess decks. So princesses were probably A until Avengers came in, and I'm not sure whether they would have been A with Avengers, but not with Disney. The other thing that I think hurts princesses a bit is that Frozen also feels like it does princesses better. I think I might actually do another faction video on Frozen, just because I feel like that one would be so easy for me to do out of all of the Disney factions. It's probably the faction where having a simple knowledge of it makes the biggest difference. But yeah, so fairies, kitties, princesses, these all were at some point worthy of being A tier, but they're a little bit too slow or too awkward compared to the best stuff in A tier now. Changer bots, I don't think were ever quite A tier, but they are good. And the problem changer bots suffer, and the problem that princess changer bots have, they're in round 2, but the problem princess changer bots are going to have in later rounds is that a lot of the time a changer bots deck has to have a certain amount of setup ready at the start of their turn. If they get it, they win. If they don't have it, they can't really improvise very well if they don't have the setup in play. And Princess Changers does that and turns that particular characteristic up to 11, because when the minion they're dropping is often a 5, that means that once they play their Titan at start of turn, make a bruiser bigger, drop a princess, something's breaking. And that need for just a little bit of setup to be good means that they're going to have a Peter Principle issue. And I think Changer bots could be good enough, maybe in a qualifier range, not so much, though, when they get to the championships. Apes are not A. Now, actually, I think Beryl said that apes were the only one of those 6 that he thought were maybe A. Here's why I don't think apes are A. Really, the only A-tier apes deck that is definitely an A-tier deck is Apes plus Nightmare Before Christmas. Ape Pirates, in my personal opinion, was a little bit lucky to make it through the qualifiers. Ape Pirates, it's just too inconsistent to be favored to make it through a qualifier setup. On top of that, there are ninjas to contend with in this tier, and ninjas made it to round 2 without having access to Invisible Ninja with 2 decks. By the way, zombies are probably one of the partners that most appreciates what the Ninja Titan does in the first place anyway. Knights don't mind it either, so with all of that, I look at it and I go, yeah, apes don't fit in this tier because there's too many things they don't like that are going to be present. Kung Fu can also be annoying. Kung Fu did not make it, but they might have had Sifu been available early. Now, the way Sifu was not able to save Kung Fairies from losing to zombie critters badly in the second game makes me a little bit more comfortable having Kung Fu not get tiered in A, but if at some point I get it tiered in B+, it will get another shot at A. Again, decks that make B+ with flying colors will get a new shot at A if there's some reason to think that maybe they should belong in A. Assuming that this ever happens in my schedule, which, my Smash Up playing schedule, there's always more games that I can play than there is time for me to play them in. Astronauts, I don't think were ever really A. They're a good faction, they're not a great faction. A is sort of like the borderline between good and great. And yeah, that's the 6 factions that were on the bubble. So if I look at this, what do we now have? I looked at this and said, all of these factions, I'm just going to rank them as B+ until proven otherwise. And I think in the case of fairies and princesses, there is a very good chance that those 2 factions are in fact B+, especially fairies. I don't know about the others, including actually kitties. What I really don't know is how much of the stuff that just punks kitties is in A tier and will not be available as opponents in B. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think kitties like playing against Polynesian Voyagers, but some of the question is, are Polynesian Voyagers good enough to be a metagame threat to kitties? If not, then kitties probably is B+. Wrong tab. Here we go. All right. So that's what's going on with tiering. 19 decks have made it to A- here. I have them in order of the ones that had, 4 decks. 4 decks make it to round 2. Avengers and Zombies first, then the ones... 6 factions got there with 3 decks, and then the remaining 11 factions got there with 2. This doesn't necessarily mean that these factions are weaker than the other ones. We'll just see how far some of these different factions get into later rounds. But yeah, I've got them listed in approximate order of how well they're doing so far, how many chances they have to make it to A or A+, and we'll see. My guess is that 2 decks making it to round 3A will be worth an A rating, and 2 decks making it to round 4A will be worth A+. I may adjust that slightly based on how bad the cuts are, because I just don't know how many decks are going to get eliminated in each round. Now, talking about elimination, round 1B was literally as bloody as it possibly could have been. Every one of these matches of a 1-1 versus 0-2 was going to produce exactly 1 deck with 2 wins or more, so these were all going to eliminate a deck. But what happened was all 3 games between 1 and 1 decks had a winner and a loser, which meant that we had 31 decks advance on their own merits. It could have been as many as 34 if all 3 of these were drawn. So let's take a look match by match at what's going on for round 2A, because this is going to be interesting. First matchup is the 1 seed versus the 3 seed. Now, what I said in the last video about Shield Kree is it can beat any deck and lose to any deck, because it really just depends on, do you draw your cards in your right order? Like, you want to draw Minerva early. I'm thinking of drawing the cards in the right order because that's going to be something worth talking about with Itty Grims in a little bit, drawing the cards in the right order. It's not so much about drawing the right cards with Shield Kree or Itty Grims, it's about getting them in the right order. And Shield Kree did not draw their cards in the right order in this round. They didn't really draw their cards in the right order that well against Zombie Critters either. But the thing is, if Exploring Avengers is always favored in this tournament until it gives me a reason not to think it's the best deck. And so I've got to predict for this round. Explorers Avengers is the favorite. It's likely to be either a draw or a win for them. Shield Kree could conceivably win it, but I think it's still pretty unlikely for Exploring Avengers to get knocked out of this tournament this early. Second matchup. Grim Frozen Tales is a very, very good deck. Wizard Hydra should be too good for it. This one I'm actually going to predict a Hydra Wizards win. Ninja Zombies versus Masters of Were Evil. This is 2 factions that do not like playing against ninjas. Masters of Evil, because they step down the amount of power they have in play in order to score their alternate victory points, they do not like getting their stuff removed by ninjas. And they probably also don't like the zombie steady pressure and the fact that zombies mean that if Ninja Master comes up, it will come back and back and back. Werewolves do not like playing against ninjas because in a tough spot, werewolves really want to be able to do silly stuff with Moon Touched in order to get out of hand for what the other deck can deal with. And ninjas are pretty good at dealing with whatever they put Moon Touched on. So this one, I'm going to say Ninja Zombie should be the favorite here. Board 4. Zombie Dragons versus Ignoble Elves. Now, the interesting thing about this matchup is Dragons really do not like dealing with Elves, and they don't love dealing with Ignobles either. Zombie Dragons, I believe, is the better deck for sure, and especially if you take a look on here, how many copies of each faction made it? 4 Zombies decks, 3 Dragons decks. These are premier factions in this tier. Ignobles and Elves are not. Ignobles and Elves are not in this tier. This is the only copy of each faction that has made it into the championship. And won at least one game, because we have Elf Sharks here at 0-4. Zombie Dragons is the better deck, I think, but maybe in this matchup, this is probably a terrible matchup for them. So this matchup I call as being a little more equal. I will not be surprised. I think if I have to give one side an advantage, I'm going to give it to the Ignoble Elves. It's a little too much of a counter matchup. So it's sort of the reverse of the previous matchup. And while I'm at it, let's talk a little bit about how these decks got here. Is there anything interesting to say? Grim Frozen Tales drew with Astro Kitties to make it. Astro Kitties was actually pretty close to winning this one. I may have mentioned it last time, but the first game 1 was 15-16. Game 2 was 16-16, and Grim Frozen Tales won it in overtime. So they sort of limped into the second round. Masters of Were Evil, where are you? Oh, yeah. They beat 8 Pirates once, and then 8 Pirates went on a tear, winning that game 25-15. The only reason they didn't go to infinity is they ran out of bases with a breakpoint of 22 or less, because that's how much power they had bouncing to every new base as it came into play. Ignoble Elves, where are they? 30. Yeah, they drew with Werewolf Chamber Pots. they drew with the Werewolf Chamber Pots. They were only able to beat those one game out of 2. Lion Shifter King versus Inca Dragons. I don't like either Shapeshifters or Lion Kings as a dragon opponent. I think dragons are a tough opponent for them. On top of that, Inca are capable of making key minions 6 powers to protect them from Scar. I will not be surprised if Inca Dragons starts 4-0. I think this may even be closer to an Inca Dragons win than it is to a draw. Sinister Avengers versus Itty Grims. Before this matchup happened, I would have called it a draw to a slight Sinister Avengers advantage, but most likely to be a draw because both of these decks are very good when they get rolling, not so good when they don't. So let's talk about Itty Grims, because Itty Grims started this tournament 0-2. They then played Dragon Knights, who I predicted to finish the tournament in 5th place. Whoops. So what happens here? Itty Grims had, in these 2 rounds, 3 games where they drew their cards in the right order. This is, they drew a lot of Search early. They got, in the matchup against Dragon Knights, they were playing turn 1 Rumpelstiltskins. And let me tell you, a turn 1 Rumpelstiltskin may be searching for one half of the Charming combo, or just making sure that if you've already got a half of it, making sure that you have your teamwork to line up with it, or something like that. Your hand is so much better when it's like, okay, I get to play the Rumpelstiltskin, and just whatever is missing, whether it makes a combo right now or just gives me a piece and gives me the maximum number of outs to draw into the next combo, is very big. There are even some situations in which, with a turn 1 Rumpelstiltskin, I would consider looking for Critter Coach. Coach and not Champion, and that's specifically if my turn 2 play was going to be, say, Hansel or Gretel, and I wanted to go for the play of playing a Pokemon trainer and searching for the other half of that combo. Like, Hansel plus Critter Coach searching for Gretel is a 12 power burst. And the reason I might search for Coach over Champion, I was thinking about this earlier today. It's kind of a weird position. I did not get this position in the matchup against Sinister Avengers. I was thinking about it like, yeah, I think I want the 4 over the 5. And the reason for that is that Critter Champion can do the most work double or triple barreling at a secondary base for Floo Fairies to help give you draw consistency that will help line up Grim combos, because Critter Champion sitting on a secondary base is a great threat later on. It can go search for Tadpore, and she can go search for Tadpore and move herself to a more active base at some point. So Critter Champion in play, I value that high enough that I would rather burn a Coach on the one and done kind of Grim 2-power pairing up burst than a Champion. And I would rather draw the Champion in a position where I've got time. So if I'm going to do that early search for Critter Coach, it's because I want to do a specific turn 3 burst, and I don't think the 1 extra power from Champion is worth making my deck a little bit worse by not being able to draw the Champion later and do Champion things. Sort of a smash-up, very much a theory crafting thing, but I thought that was an interesting point that I might choose the weaker minion over the stronger minion with this deck. In any case, they had 2 games where I drew search early, I was able to plan for what to get, and then after that, once the deck starts working, it wins. You can really see this in the score line when they played Sinister Avengers in the second round. Sinister Avengers just was fast to the punch. Itty Grim did not have its search cards early. It was trying to do setup plays with cards like Critter Coaches that are ill-suited to setup because you want to use them as finishers. And Sinister Avengers, when it got an advantage, was able to roll pretty comfortably. However, in the second game, Itty Grim's got search cards. Not Rumpelstiltskin, but the lesser search cards early, was able to set up combos, and once it started rolling, Itty Grim's is capable of breaking a base, Tadporing a defender off it, or otherwise destroying a defender, and getting a solo out of nowhere. And what it actually did, the way it won by 10 points, was it forced 2 base solos by removing the defender with Tadpore and breaking the base in the same turn. And Sinister Avengers is not well suited to placing multiple defenders to deal with stuff like this. So once Itty Grim's got rolling, it rolled. And similarly speaking, I think Itty Grim's has decent matchup against large minion opponents. The Dragon Knights really didn't get all that much mileage out of their Imperial Dragons or hatchlings, because when Itty Grim's burst, it burst so hard that it kind of didn't care. Next line, Mage and the Beast versus Steampunk Incas. Okay, first off, Steampunk Incas proved in S tier that it can get 1 win against any opposing deck. So this could be Mage and the Beast's first result other than a 2-0. They are currently 10-0 overall in my games. I'm still favoring Mage and the Beast. I think it is possible that they might even win a game if Workshop appears against Steampunk Incas. But I would say this is evenly split between a draw and a Mage and the Beast win. I cannot see Steampunk Incas winning a game without access to Workshop. It's just Mage and the Beast is too good for that. Vigilante Knights. Normally Vigilantes into Princesses is terrible for Vigilantes because like 4s into 5s is just kind of bad. But this Vigilantes deck, I think, has the advantage. They have the right kind of tempo removal to play the right kind of tempo game to stop Princess Changers. I think they are likely to win their match. As for how Steampunk Incas and Princess Changers got here last round, do we have anything interesting about that? Steampunk Incas, yeah, did a ridiculous thing. Yeah, I talked about that match last time. Princess Changers, they're 14. Yeah, they drew with Explorer Troopers. They haven't looked super impressive in this tournament, but they have looked super impressive in some previous tournaments. Teddy Wizards. Yeah, we just saw Mojo say something about Teddy Wizards looking really, really disgusting in a tournament game. And yeah, they can be really disgusting. Mad Scientist Pirates is a deck that maybe can put up a fight. I have to say Teddy Wizards is favored. I think I'm usually going to be saying I favor the 2-0 deck here. Now, we start to get to the decks that are 3-1 on the weaker half, and this is when it maybe starts to get a little more interesting, because, like I have said, Ignoble Elves might be favored, but other than that, it's like, yeah, left side has the advantage, and will probably win as often as it draws. Big Hero Grannies is an absolute beast. Zombie Critters, however, just took out Kung Fairies after drawing with Shield Kree. So Zombie Critters is also a beast, and this might be a match worth streaming. That's my thought about this. This is a heavyweight battle for this round. Big Hero Grannies versus Zombie Critters. This could be Big Hero Grannies, the break to their current 9-game winning streak. Could also be a role for them. I just don't know. Both decks have similar types of play, really very similarly. They have similar types of advantages. So this matchup is going to tell us a lot about these decks. It's a test. Hydra Lions, Frozen Avengers. All right. So Frozen is really good. We've got less data than we should have on Frozen Avengers because I inadvertently had them play Astro Dragons twice. Hydra Lions beat up the Egyptian Fairies, who were probably one of the weaker seeded decks for sure. I feel like this is going to be a pair of coin flips. Really what's going to happen is, like, when do Hydra Lions draw Mufasa? That is going to determine who wins each game. That is going to determine more than who plays first. So really, I think this match is a pair of coin flips. All three results are somewhat likely. Frozen doesn't have its normal advantage at countering removal because, like, Hydra Lions just... it has 2 destruction cards that can hit the opposing minions. And that's just not a big deal to counter. Hydra Sharks versus Mad Scientist Werewolves. Okay, so... Mad Scientists were really, really impressive in round 1B. Mad Scientist Werewolves took out Shield Kree, for crying out loud. And so, I don't know with this one. I really genuinely do not know what to make of this, because I've played a grand total of, what, 4 games with the Bride? No, they had the Bride in round 1. So, okay, I've played 8 games with the Bride. It looks really good. Both of these decks are good. I don't know. This is similar to Big Hero Grannies versus Zombie Critters. Both decks might be beasts. Ninja Knights versus MOE Grannies. Man, I get down to where both decks have a winning record, and I'm sitting here going, I genuinely do not know much about who's going to be better here. I think I have to say Ninjas should have an edge over MOE in general, so I think Ninja Knights should be favored here. I think Knights are going to be good at reacting correctly to wherever Great Grandma lands, working around it, so I think I favor Ninja Knights in this one. Exploring Critters, Avenging Knights. What did Avenging Knights do in 1B? They're 33rd. They beat Sinister Werewolves. I mean, Avengers are a really hard matchup for Sinister Six anyway. So, probably Knights also are. So, that they won a matchup where they probably countered their opponent. Who did Explore? They beat Orc Warriors. Alright. So, neither of these decks have proved as much as some of the other decks have, because they had matchups that were probably pretty favorable to them. I like exploring Critters into this sort of matchup against big opposing decks, but I also think the Knights are going to be able to grail both games here. I think I might give the advantage to the deck with 1 loss. I think Avenging Knights might have the advantage here. Despite the fact that Critters matches up well into both these factions, I think they're going to grail twice, and it's going to be just enough. Ape Nightmares, we're favoring Ape Nightmares until they prove that they shouldn't be favored. Yes, they drew in round 1 against Masters of Were Evil, who, have a bad matchup in round 2, but still did make it to round 2. But Ape Nightmares are good. Also, they have a good matchup against Dragons. When your big power drops come from actions rather than minions, Imperial Dragon has to be everywhere in order to draw you cards, because otherwise the Ape Nightmares just happily play their minions where the Imperial Dragon isn't, boost the minions where the Imperial Dragon is, and as a result, Imperial Dragon doesn't draw you enough cards to do Broken Dragon things. And yeah, Dragon Pirates are good, but they don't have a good matchup against Nightmares Before Christmas or against Apes, really, and so I favor the higher seeded deck here. Now, this was going to be on the button match, like, effectively 16 versus 17 out of 32. This was going to be the corker match. I thought it was. And, the thing is, I was expecting Dragon Knights to win against Itty Grims and go to 3-1, and they would have been where Zombie Explorers are. I was thinking we were going to have this crazy match that really scared me for Dragon Knights when they played Beauty and the Werebeast. However, Itty Grims ended up over here drawing with Sinister Avengers, and in this case, Beauty and the Werebeast is playing Zombie Explorers. Don't get me wrong, Zombie Explorers is a really good deck, but Beauty and the Werebeast is... That 19 seed means they were the 3rd overall finisher of all the qualifying decks. I have got to favor them here. I don't see anything in Zombies or Explorers that counter either... that counters Beauty and the Werebeast, and let me tell you, they can do some broken combo garbage. Last round, as a matter of fact, Aladdin Knights is not a weak deck. Aladdin Knights probably deserved to get at least one win, let alone... Oh yeah, they deserved to make round 2A. I think they're one of the 32 best decks in this field of 48. But Beauty and the Werebeast edged them in the first game and then trounced them in the second, and Aladdin Knights ended up going 0-4, which I do not think is a fair assessment of their strength, but that's what happens when your pairings are bad. Who did they play? Big Hero Grannies and Beauty and the Werebeast. That is a brutal round 1. Beauty and the Werebeast is a top deck within this field, in my opinion. Zombie Explorers is maybe closer to the middle of the field in strength. Both of their decks, this is a matchup where all 4 factions are definitely somewhere in A tier. And actually, Beauty and the Beast is like the only faction that only has 2 decks remaining. So Beauty and the Werebeast is like facing getting hit with a minus if they lose either of their decks. Beauty and the Beast can get hit with a minus if they lose either decks at this point. But their 2 decks are Mage and the Beast and Beauty and the Werebeast, and those 2 decks are very hard outs. So yeah, I'm favoring Beauty and the Werebeast for this one. And I will keep you updated. I don't know if I'm going to do a video exactly at the end of round 2A or if I'm going to do a video at the end of round 2B. I kind of think we still have long enough rounds, with this being a 16-match round, that I would like to do a match at the end of round 2A. But as far as streamed games, I think I would love to show Big Hero Grannies versus Zombie Critters. Maybe I would like to show Mage and the Beast against Steampunk Incas. And I would love to show... Well, I wanted to show the button matchup, but now the button matchup is no longer against Dragon Knights. It's a little less interesting, because I don't think Zombie Explorers is as premium class an opponent. Honestly, Vigilante Knights might be interesting to show, even though I've streamed them once during the qualifiers, because they are crazy fun to play. And I might also want to show off one of these seeded decks. I kind of like the idea of showing off some of the seeded decks that have actually performed so far, but maybe I'll wait until the seeded decks really prove that they belong by making it to round 3. I don't know. But yeah, definitely... I definitely, anything I stream from here, possibly even in the next couple days, I want to stream Big Hero Grannies. That is a corker of a matchup, I think. And if any of you have any particular requests for matches that you want to see from this round, let me know in the comments or let me know on Discord, and I will for whatever games I'm streaming, I will try to fit those in. Okay, I've babbled enough about this. I'm going probably to get back to playing some more Round 2A games now, so happy smashing, everyone.